In the sweltering forests of Jamaica, where mist clings to the blue-green ridges and the call of drums once echoed across the valleys, a war was waged that few empires ever truly understood. It was not fought with disciplined battalions in open fields, nor with gleaming cannons lined upon fortress walls. Instead, it was waged in shadows, in tangled forests, in the hearts of a people who had known the cruelty of bondage and who refused ever again to bow their heads. This was the war of the Jamaican Maroons against the might of the British, empire and uprising that would shake the very foundations of slavery in the Caribbean. The story begins in the early 18th century, when Jamaica had become one of Britain's richest colonies, its plantations fed by the brutal labor of enslaved Africans. Sugar was wealth, and wealth was power. But deep in the interior, beyond the reach of coastal estates, there lived communities who rejected the chains of the empire. They were the Maroons' descendants of Africans who had escaped bondage, joined by their children, their allies, and others who refused submission. The British called them runaways. They called themselves free. The land they occupied was no gentle refuge. Jamaica's interior was a fortress of nature, jagged hills, steep ravines, and forests dense with ferns and towering trees. The British redcoats, drilled for parade ground precision, found themselves stumbling and choking in this unforgiving wilderness. The Maroons, however, moved through it like shadows, guided by knowledge passed from one generation to the next. They set ambushes, struck swiftly, and disappeared as though the land itself had swallowed them whole. The historian Edward Long, a planter himself, grudgingly admitted that the Maroons fought with a courage and conduct that might have honored the greatest heroes of antiquity. The roots of the great uprising stretched back to Spain's rule of Jamaica. When the British seized the island in 1655, enslaved Africans used the chaos to flee into the hills, forming the first Maroon settlements. Over decades, their numbers grew. By the 1720s and 1730s, the Maroons had forged strong communities, living off the land, hunting, farming, and trading secretly with sympathetic townsfolk. They preserved traditions from West Africa drums, dances, and spiritual practices fused with the realities of their new homeland. For them, freedom was not an abstract ideal. It was breath. It was survival. It was sacred, but freedom, in the eyes of the planters, was rebellion. Plantation society lived in terror of Maroon raids, for they not only liberated fellow Africans from bondage, but also destroyed property and defied British authority. For years, the colonial government launched punitive expeditions into the hills, yet time and again, their red-coated soldiers came back battered, demoralized, or not at all. The Maroons fought a war of endurance, and the British soon realized they faced not mere fugitives, but a people determined to defend their sovereignty. The tension erupted into open conflict in the 1730s. In what history remembers as the First Maroon War, leaders like Cudjoe of the Leeward Maroons became legends, described as cunning, unyielding, and fiercely protective of his people. Cudjoe directed guerrilla campaigns that confounded his enemies. At night, the Maroons' horn-zabbings blared across the valleys, signaling movement, summoning fighters, spreading fear among their foes. British troops, more accustomed to European fields of battle, faltered in the thick jungle, where every rustle could mean a Maroon ambush and every path could be a trap. By 1738, the British could no longer ignore the truth. They could not defeat the Maroons. Out of desperation, the colonial governor sought negotiations. In a moment that remains one of the most remarkable in Caribbean history, the Empire of Britain was forced to sign treaties with escaped slaves acknowledging their freedom and granting them lands of their own. The Maroons were to cease hostilities and, in return, were recognized as autonomous communities. It was an extraordinary concession, one that revealed both the strength of the Maroons and the limits of British colonial power. The Empire, for once, bent its knee, yet peace was uneasy. The treaties required Maroons to return future runaways, a demand that placed them in a painful moral bind. For people who had once fled chains, to deny others the same freedom cut deep. Still, the Maroons guarded their independence fiercely, living as free people in a world built on slavery. They remained watchful, wary of British treachery, but also determined to preserve what they had won. Half a century later, new flames of war would ignite. In the 1790s, inspired by revolutions abroad and inflamed by their own grievances, some Maroons rose again in what came to be called the Second Maroon War. By then, Jamaica had become a powder keg, its plantations teeming with enslaved Africans whose whispers of rebellion haunted the nights of white planters. The uprising of the Maroons was both a threat and a symbol, a reminder that freedom could not be extinguished. Though this second war ended with deportations and betrayals, it revealed once more that the Maroons were not passive subjects of empire, but a people willing to fight and die for liberty. The aftermath of the uprisings reshaped Jamaica. For the planters, the treaties were bitter compromises. For the enslaved majority, they were sparks of hope. Every drumbeat in the hills carried a message. Slavery could be resisted, the empire could be defied, freedom was possible. The Maroon Wars became part of a wider struggle that would, over decades, bring the abolition of slavery to the British Empire. In 1834, when emancipation was declared, the Maroons stood as living proof that Africans in Jamaica had never been mere victims, but actors in their own destiny. The legacy of the Jamaican Maroon Uprising endures, not only in history books, but in the very landscape of Jamaica. Towns like Accompong and Moortown still preserve Maroon traditions, where the abbing horn is blown in ceremonies and ancestral spirits are honored. The Maroons are remembered as warriors, leaders, and survivors. Their struggle echoes in reggae songs, in nationalist movements, and in the pride of a people who know their ancestors once stood unbroken against empire today. When one walks through the cockpit country, the rugged hills where Cudjoe and his fighters once stood, the silence feels heavy with memory. It is as if the forest itself remembers the battles, the hidden paths, the breathless escapes, and the triumphs of a people who refused to be enslaved. The Maroon Uprising is more than a tale of rebellion. It is a testament to human dignity, a defiance of tyranny, and a reminder that freedom, once claimed, is worth every sacrifice. This story matters today because it speaks to resilience against oppression, to the power of unity, and to the truth that empires, however mighty, are not invincible when confronted by people determined to live free. The Jamaican Maroons carved out liberty when none was offered, and in doing so, they changed the course of Caribbean history forever. This episode has been brought to you with great effort, weaving together history, memory, and legacy. If you value deep, high-quality storytelling that keeps alive the voices of the past, consider supporting this work. Every gesture of support helps ensure that stories like that of the Maroons continue to be told with the dignity and power they deserve.